There we go. Easy. Seamless. It was never in doubt. And this is picking up on a point that we've already made, really. We've had the start of the flat season. We're into the Grand National. Easter changes things every year. We've got the Dubai World Cup on the same day as the Grand National. Racing is simply too unwieldy a sport, isn't it, John, to mark with clear lines that people would like?
Absolutely. I mean, and as I said, now, flat racing especially, because of the international element, I still think that you could quantify national hunt racing a lot more clearly for the wider public.
What do you think about that?
Well, I don't know that it's a particular issue in terms of national hunt racing. I think it is strange, but idiosyncrasy is the middle name of horse racing very often, that you have a day which was an extremely good day yesterday, launching the flat season at Doncaster and Kempton, and then we're straight into the Grand National.
We have had this argument.
I know.
But literally 100 years.
Yeah. Well, literally, even more probably.
Since Admiral Rouse.
Yeah, since Admiral Rouse. What would his solution be?
I doubt Admiral Rouse. I don't think Admiral Rouse gave two hoots about national hunt racing.
But the fact, it is an idiosyncrasy, and it is a bit peculiar. It is peculiar. However, idiosyncrasies aren't all bad, and if you're sitting in a marketing office, in a shiny office somewhere worrying about marketing, then it's not ideal, is it? However, you know, we're not in an ideal world. It is a bit odd, but does it really matter? Maybe the thing to do is to really put a shine on the spring double. Of the Lincoln and the Grand National.
But can I say the one thing also which is so easy to forget is, I mean, there are an awful lot of dual yards, you know, flat and jump and whatnot, who never, I mean, just the absolute relentlessness of horse racing, what that does, you know, everybody talks about staffing issues and things like that. The relentlessness of this sport, there is no let up. Surely, if you were having your helicopter view of the whole sport, you would have a point, both flat racing and national hunt racing, where you say, whoa, stop. Let's just give everybody a break for a moment. Everybody needs a breather. Surely that's what you would do from any kind of...
In the way that jumping used to have that.
Well, of course, but just from a human point of view, just give people that bit of break.
I should stress that before the show, I used the words helicopter view as an example of an irritating marketing expression, which John Inverdale has now ascribed to me.
And just a quick word about the Lincoln. Heritage is not a dirty word, and the heritage of this sport is greater than any other sport. And absolutely crucial to that heritage is the Lincoln, and the Lincoln originally at Lincoln, now at Doncaster. That is a big part of the early part of the year heritage, and it would be a great pity to fiddle around with that too much.
So just big it up a bit more.
Yeah,
actually embrace
but the spring double hardly ever gets. On your podcast this week, you actually said the spring double's coming up. It's the Lincoln followed by the.
No one had a clue what I was talking about.
Well, there was an element of that. Maybe that is a thing that you've got. A guest from the betting industry coming up, Seb, coming up very shortly. So maybe the spring double, you're talking about dual-purpose trainers, maybe there's a special bonus available if you can win as a stable, win the Lincoln and the Grand National, for example.
Here's another stupid thing. So you run the Lincoln and you have Doncaster on the same day as the Grand National, but you have it at midday, and then you have the Grand National at 5:30 in the evening. There's your spring double today.
I can hear the controllers at ITV embracing this idea enthusiastically.
But equally,
I've got to move on, because that's the nature of this part of the show. And we'll never get Seb Butterworth in otherwise. And Nicky Henderson's coming up later in the show as well. Anti-doping. Well, the BHA this week have announced a raft of very interesting measures encompassing a whole series of substances and doping methods, gene doping being the most eye-catching.
Had you ever heard of gene doping before?
Well, I had, but somebody would have to explain to me how you do it, and James Given did that earlier in the week.
And I heard an interview where he gave the analogy that obviously in some parts of life you can do gene treatment, and you're actually trying to aid somebody who's, for example, got cancer, and it's a great way of treating. But this can be used, I think James's favourite word is nefarious. It can be done in a way that is rather more sinister. Manipulating DNA is what we're talking about. It can enhance performance and it can aid recovery, and that is something that he didn't say this, but Brant Dunshee, acting CEO of the BHA, said there was no evidence of this having taken place. Didn't think James necessarily said that.
I asked him the same question. There was a long pause.
Well, quite. So there's no suggestion that it's rife or anything like that. But what the BHA is saying is, look, this type of technology exists. If we're not right up with the pace on this one, then there are chances of all sorts of difficulties in the future. So that's reassuring. I think there were other things as well relating to clenbuterol, the injections into joints as well. It's complicated. There's a lot of detail in this, but the really good side from a racing point of view is that people are thinking about it. People are wanting to be up with the pace. People are wanting to make certain that as technologies move ever more rapidly, racing can deal with that.
And that grey area, particularly with a substance like clenbuterol, John, which has been widely misused in all sport.
Of course.
Cycling, athletics, tennis, boxing. Alex Steedman was pointing out to me earlier in the week a huge problem in boxing. It's the fact that people are going right to the edge of what is acceptable medically in order to get a performance-enhancing edge, and that's the grey area that's incredibly difficult to police.
And it's a race as close as the Lincoln yesterday. You know, the cheats, if you want to call them that, or the people who are who are pushing, and can the good guys, you know, there's a short head in it. But just occasionally you feel that it remains a short head, that you can't quite get to a nose, you can't quite get to a dead heat, because there's always something else that will come up across all sports. You know, if you're looking for a means to get an edge on somebody, you will always get that edge until somebody else realises you've got it, and then you've got to find another edge, because that's I'm afraid that's the nature of humanity. That's just the world we live in.
Let's talk about the Professional Racing Association, because it has released its assessment of all racecourses this week. This is Peter Savill's.
This was
I always feel rude if I call it a splinter group or a guerrilla group, because it's probably disrespecting what it's actually trying to achieve. But it is not within the official auspices of the sport.
It's trying to be a disruptor, isn't it?
A disruptor
in a positive way. And this report that's come out from the PRA didn't mince its words. Had a go at Ascot, a go at the Jockey Club, a go at ARC. Poor cost control was how it described Ascot, saying that although it contributes a large amount of money to all races, it's not enough when you compare it against the sort of revenue we're talking about. The Jockey Club said this report had a bloated cost structure, but was optimistic that there was going to be a change of personnel at the top of the organisation, so that might improve. In terms of ARC, it said it runs a very tight ship, could do more than it does, so which was a sort of backhanded compliment of some sort. They are trying to get racecourses to contribute more and believe, and this is it says their government intervention, believes that the government could get involved. Well, there's absolutely... I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong the government should be involved, but there is zero chance, I would have thought, of getting the government involved.
But again, what we were saying earlier, everything's politics.
Yeah,
isn't it? I mean,
it is.
You know, you can't operate in isolation, especially not an industry on this scale. I know it's always trotted out that horse racing is the 6th biggest rural industry in the country. I'm never quite sure if there's a definitive, you know, absolutely irrefutable proof.
Well, I think lots of analysis has been done in order to demonstrate that.
But anything that's big, you know, on whatever it might be, cannot be exempt from government intervention at central government, local authority level, everything else, and that's the issue.
But if you've got the government directly involved, you've got to be careful what you wish for, haven't you? Because suddenly things would change. But there is no prospect of that.
But where do you stand on the idea that you've got cinemas and theatres, effectively, which is what the sports venues are, taking all the money, but the actors, the stars, are receiving none of it? That is the sort of the idea that the PRA is founded on.
Yeah.
Elton John found himself in this report, didn't he? In that direct...
But Novak Djokovic, going back to what, again, everything goes round in the circle, you know, part of this new rebel, guerrilla, whatever you want to call it, players group, saying that tennis players are victimised by the system and this, that and the other. I mean, where does it end? You know, I mean, how do you actually be... How can you be fair to everything and everyone? You know, it's like the old thing about, you know, if you try to please everybody, you please nobody. And that's the worry, and I think, in a sense. I think there are so many elements within horse racing. I think if you focused on 2 or 3 elements, one of which would, for me, would always be the customer experience.
Yeah.
Get that better, other things will flow from that.
My producer's got a booking at the Toby Carvery this lunchtime and is trying to get me to get a move on. Jerry Hill. I mean, I'd like to give Jerry his full 2 minutes here, but we could probably assess his impact pretty succinctly, Cornelius. Shepherding the sport through the pandemic.
Jerry Hill, MBE, which is...
Dr. Jerry Hill, MBE,
Dr. Jerry
who's
Hill,
been the chief
MBE.
medical advisor of the BHA. He's announced his retirement this week.
And I think he's done it 10 years, hasn't he? So a decade.
Yeah, it's a good stint in that role.
And I heard an interview that you did with him earlier on in the week, and there was a very interesting... So he is seen as having guided racing back to something approaching normality during the lockdown. I think the flat racing started on the 1st of June.
It did, yeah.
And the
It was
jumping the
6
1st
weeks,
of July.
basically, yeah.
And he has been credited with making certain that the right protocols were in place in order for racing to be able to resume. But the interesting thing was, and we were talking earlier on about COVID and Cheltenham in 2020, he went to a conference in January of 2020. And he said in this interview that he and a colleague sort of saw what was coming out of China and alarm bells were ringing, and they started planning, and he started planning because I think he probably saw a lockdown of some sort as inevitable. So he started planning in January. So racing was right on the button.
And wasn't that one of the most extraordinary things about, if we keep talking about divisions within horse racing, how racing, by virtue of
came together,
of necessity, came together and actually recreated the sport at a time when there was nothing else going on, which was enormous credit to everybody. I remember going racing at Kempton, because I had a runner there, and just leaning on a running rail next door to Emma Laval, and we just looked around at deserted. You know, I should have taken a picture, but I didn't. I just thought, this is remember this, because this will be one of the most extraordinary memories you ever have of all the time that you spend in horse racing, a moment like this, when we are almost the only 2 people here.
And just on Jerry Hill, we can't just say all wonderful stuff about COVID.
Well,
there obviously has
saunas.
been some drama as well
Yeah.
in terms of saunas. The interesting thing about the saunas is there are plenty of people who don't agree about the fact that the saunas haven't come back in since the pandemic. However, when they take the helicopter view of Jerry Hill, the warmth is really evident.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the Toby Carvery, so that's why I stopped mid-sentence. Mother's Day as well, yeah.
Yes, don't forget.
Yeah.
Jerry Hill, who has been the Chief Medical Advisor of the BHA, we wish him a very happy retirement. Now, Emily Upjohn is a horse who gave the Lloyd Webbers and John Shack an awful lot of pleasure when she was racing, but they took the decision to sell her to Northern Farms in Japan by way of a covering with Flightline in America, which is a decision that will have surprised an awful lot of people, but had, I think, some sound business sense behind it. Cornelius, is this going to sort of set alarm bells ringing? You know, if a stud as eminent as this, and one that, you know, founds itself on great bloodlines, is prepared to sell middle distance blood of this nature to Japan, you know, the sport's only going one way.
It's still a business, isn't it? And the offer that came from Japan was obviously too good to turn down. It's not as though anyone is walking away or anything like that. It's just that they've made that particular business decision. Presumably it was, you know, and other big owner breeders who aren't walking away, but they've got to make some business decisions as well along the way.
Every horse has its price.
Well, absolutely.
Well, you say it's still a business. It is a business.
Well, it is a bit. Absolutely. It is a business, and you're getting a lot of money in, and no one's sort of grabbing the money and walking off. They're reinvesting, presumably, in interesting new bloodlines, etc., etc. So
I always used to think the difference between flat racing and national hunt racing was that flat racing was a business which had sport at its heart, whereas national hunt racing was a sport that had a bit of business tacked on. And of course, that in many ways is the biggest change in the last 20, 30 years, that national hunt racing is now big business too.
Because people are spending so much money on the stock.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And talking about the thoroughbred breeding industry, City of Troy is going to be shuttling off to Australia. The really striking thing about this was €75,000 to have your mare mated with City of Troy in Europe. What's that? Just over 60,000 sterling. In Australia, it's 49,500 Aussie dollars.
Only about 25
which
grand.
is 30,000 euros.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting, from a business point of view, you know, to have your mare covered by City of Troy is going to be a lot cheaper there than here.
Well, A, they breed more for speed in Australia, and B, of course, he's got to prove himself at what
and they love shuttle stallions as well, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. Now, Neil Callan has had more than a rap over the knuckles from the British Horse Racing Authority this week. He's been given an 8-month ban. That ban's been suspended for 2 years, so he's OK to ride, provided he does not fall foul of the regulator again as regards bringing the sport into disrepute via his use of...
That's not riding offences, is it?
Yeah, no, exactly, via his use of social media, which has got him into...
So they fined him
£1,500
1,500 quid as well.
Yeah.
And they took a pretty strong view, words like inflammatory, disrespectful, misogynist used as far as some posts that he made. They were aimed at one specific steward at the authority as a whole as well. And you can't have it both ways, can you? On the one hand, people want to be protective of jockeys and other participants within racing about how they are treated on social media by the outside. But clearly, the other side to that coin is that if you're within the industry, you've got to behave yourself as well. So it was a salutary lesson for lots of people.
Agree.
Yeah. Let's move on. That was Neil Callan. So I've saved you a minute there. He might get his starter in as well. Langer Dan, about the most talked about horse in training. Horse who came to life in the spring, missed Cheltenham, couldn't get him quite right, was going to run at Aintree. They thought it was a standard respiratory issue that they could clear up. In fact, there was an underlying heart condition that has led to his retirement. He's one of those horses that people aren't going to forget in a hurry for every reason under the sun.
And a great name.
Yeah.
I mean,
and the great name is a really important part of the whole thing. I knew we were going to agree about one thing.
Yeah, no, it is, isn't it? I mean, the name of a horse is so important. People latch onto horses because it's a good name.
Constitution Hill, Galloping Dijon.
Constitution Hill is a fantastic name for a horse. Just happens to be a fantastic horse, but it's a great name. I Am Maximus. I'm banging on about that, but that's, you know, that's a really good name for a horse. And I sometimes think, you know, and there'll be people watching who are probably at this very moment today going to be discussing what to call a horse. And what's that horse called? 3 Under Through 5 or whatever. You know,
yeah.
That's a great name for a horse as well, because people
anything catchy,
anything that you can immediately say, I like that.
Yeah.
You know, going back to ending where we started. If the moment you call a horse something, and you say, what does that mean? You got a problem.
And so he ran at 5 festivals.
Yeah.
He won 2 Coral Cups. He was brought down when favourite for the Martin Pipe, and that amazing bit of form when he ran Galloping Dijon to 2 1/4 lengths in the Martin Pipe. And they really fancied him.
Skelton thought, I've got one that's a stone well in. Unfortunately for him, Willie Mullins had one that was 2 stone well in.
Yeah.
But the seasons are really striking, aren't they? So he only ever won in March or April or October and November, but he didn't fancy the bleak midwinter. Probably a good judge.
It's a bit like your appearances on this programme, really, isn't it?
Oh, thank you very much.
Only when you get up, only when it's light when you get up.
Yeah.
Is that it?
When no one else wants to do the Sunday where the clocks go forward.
Absolutely.
We want to say hello to everybody who's just tuned in and only seen 15 minutes of the programme. That's what.
I mean, what joy for them.
I know.
Those were this week's talking points.
Watch live racing now on racingtv.com.